My son texted me, "You're not invited to my graduation. Watch it online." I knew exactly what to do. The notification sound on my phone was the same cheerful ding it had always been, but somehow, at 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, it felt different. Ominous, even. I was standing in my tiny kitchen, stirring a pot of soup that would be my dinner for the next 3 nights, when Jordan's name lit up my screen. My heart did that little flutter it always did when I heard from my son. 22 years old, about to graduate summa cum laude from Lockridge University, one of those fancy schools where the tuition costs more than most people's houses. My baby, my pride, my everything. I wiped my hands on my apron, the same faded blue one I'd been wearing for the past decade, and opened the message with a smile. "You're not invited to my graduation. Just watch the live stream like everyone else." I read it once, then twice, then a third time, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that didn't feel like a knife sliding between my ribs. My legs gave out, and I found myself sitting hard on the kitchen floor, my back against the refrigerator that hummed too loudly and leaked just a little at the bottom. The phone trembled in my hands as I stared at those words. 12 words that erased 22 years of love, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. Just watch the live stream like everyone else. Like everyone else. As if I was just another distant relative, another casual acquaintance who didn't deserve a real invitation. As if I hadn't been the one who held him when he cried about his father dying. As if I hadn't been the one working double shifts at the hospital and cleaning offices until midnight just to keep food on our table. As if I hadn't been the one who danced around our cramped apartment when that acceptance letter from Lockridge came in the mail. I called him immediately. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's Jordan. You know what to do." That voice, still my little boy's voice underneath all that college polish he developed over the past 4 years. The same voice that used to beg me for bedtime stories about his daddy. The same voice that used to tell me I was the best mama in the whole world. "Jordan, baby, it's mama. I got your text and I think there might be some confusion. Call me back, okay? We need to talk about this." I hung up and waited. 1 hour. 2 hours. Nothing. The soup burned while I sat there on that cold linoleum floor, trying to understand what had happened to my son. When had I become everyone else to him? My name is Diane Washington, and I've been fighting my whole life. Fighting to keep my head above water as a single mother. Fighting to give my son opportunities one never had. Fighting to hide just how hard every single day has been since his father, Marcus, died in that car accident 16 years ago. Jordan was only 6 then, still small enough to crawl into my lap when the world felt too big and scary. I remember holding him the night we buried his daddy, promising him that everything would be okay, that I would take care of us, that I would make sure he had everything he needed to become the man his father would have been proud of. And I kept that promise. God knows I kept it. I worked as a nursing assistant at City General during the day, then cleaned office buildings downtown from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Some nights, I'd catch 2 hours of sleep in my car between shifts, just to make sure Jordan never had to worry about whether the lights would stay on or if there'd be food in the refrigerator. When he was younger, he used to worry about me. "Mama, you look tired," he'd say, those big brown eyes, Marcus's eyes, full of concern. I'd ruffle his hair and tell him I was fine, that working hard was just what people like us did. That we didn't take shortcuts, we earned everything we got. But somewhere along the way, that little boy who worried about his tired mama disappeared. Somewhere between freshman orientation at Lockridge and today, my son learned to be ashamed of where he came from. I thought about the last time I'd seen him at Christmas. How he'd corrected my grammar when I was telling a story to his girlfriend, Emma, a girl whose father owned half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. How he'd quickly changed the subject when Emma asked what I did for work, like being a nursing assistant was something to be embarrassed about. I thought about all the parents' weekends I'd stopped being invited to, all the phone calls that got shorter and less frequent, all the ways he'd been slowly cutting me out of his life. But this text, this was different. This was a declaration. This was him telling me that after everything I'd sacrificed, after every dream I'd deferred, and every comfort I'd given up, I wasn't worthy of watching him walk across that stage. What Jordan didn't know, what he'd never known, was exactly how I'd made his dream possible. The secret I'd carried for 4 years, the truth that would change everything he thought he knew about his education, his opportunities, and the woman who raised him. I pulled myself up from that kitchen floor, my knees creaking in protest. The soup was ruined, but I wasn't hungry anymore anyway. I had work to do, plans to make. Because if my son thought he could erase me from the most important day of his life, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The night Marcus died, I made a promise to his picture on our nightstand. I was 28 years old, working one job that barely paid the bills, with a 6-year-old who kept asking when Daddy was coming home from the hospital. I whispered to that photograph, "I'll give him everything you would have given him. I swear it." I had no idea what that promise would cost me. Jordan was brilliant from the start, reading before kindergarten, solving math problems that stumped kids twice his age. Teachers always said he had potential, but potential doesn't pay for tutoring or test prep or the hundreds of little things that separate kids who make it from kids who don't. So I made it happen, one shift at a time. By the time Jordan was in middle school, I was working 3 jobs. My main gig at City General paid the rent and kept the lights on. The office cleaning job downtown paid for his tutoring sessions. And the weekend housekeeping I picked up for wealthy families in the suburbs? That went into what I called his future fund, a coffee can hidden behind cereal boxes in our kitchen cabinet. I remember the night he came home with the Lockridge University brochure, freshman year of high school. He spread the glossy pages across our kitchen table like they were made of gold. "Mama, look at this place. They have a library with 4 floors. 4 floors of books." I looked at those pictures, manicured lawns, Gothic buildings, students who looked like they belonged in magazines. Then I looked at the tuition numbers in tiny print at the back. My heart sank so fast I thought I might be sick. "Baby, that's a lot of money. But Mama, if I work really hard, maybe I can get a scholarship. The guidance counselor says I have a shot." That night, after Jordan went to bed, I sat at that same kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. No matter how I ran the numbers, even with partial financial aid, Lockridge was impossible. The gap between what they might offer and what we needed was an ocean I couldn't swim across. But I'd made a promise to Marcus. When the acceptance letter came 4 years later, along with a financial aid package, Jordan danced around our tiny living room like he'd won the lottery. Partial scholarship, work-study program, need-based grants. It covered about 60% of the costs. "Mama, I did it. I actually did it." I hugged him tight, breathing in the smell of the coconut oil I still used in his hair, trying to memorize that moment before I had to figure out how to pay for the rest. "I'm so proud of you, baby. So proud." That night, while Jordan called his friends to share the news, I sat on my bed staring at the box I kept in my closet. Marcus's box. The things he'd loved most, the things I'd saved for Jordan when he got older. His collection of signed basketball cards, Jordan's namesake, Michael Jordan, along with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. His father's pride and joy, worth more now than when he'd collected them 20 years earlier. His grandfather's vintage Omega watch, the one Marcus wore on our wedding day. The one he'd planned to pass down to his son. And his 1967 Mustang, cherry red with white racing stripes, sitting in Mrs. Henderson's garage 3 blocks away. The car he'd restored by hand, the one he'd promised to teach Jordan to drive when he turned 16. I sold the basketball cards first. Drove to 3 different collectors before I found one who appreciated their value. The money paid for Jordan's first semester room and board. The watch went next. I cried in the pawn shop parking lot for 20 minutes after, but it covered his meal plan for the entire freshman year. When sophomore year came around, I knew what I had to do. The Mustang was the hardest thing I'd ever sold. Jordan had asked about it just once freshman year. "Whatever happened to Daddy's car, Mama?" "Had to let it go, baby. But it's okay. Material things don't matter." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but the $18,000 I got for it paid for another year of his dreams. I told Jordan the school had handled everything. Additional scholarships, special programs, grants he'd qualified for. I created fake letters on my computer, official-looking documents that explained how his financial aid had been adjusted to cover full costs. Mama, I can't believe how lucky I got. A full ride to Lockridge. You didn't get lucky, baby. You earned this. And he had earned it, just not the way he thought. For 4 years, I lived on ramen noodles and expired food from the hospital cafeteria. I wore the same 3 uniforms to work, rotated them through the washing machine every other day. I hadn't bought myself new clothes in so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something that fit properly. But Jordan never knew. He never knew about the nights I went to bed hungry, so his dining plan could include weekend meals. He never knew about the credit cards I maxed out to buy his textbooks, or the extra shifts I picked up every time he mentioned needing something. He never knew that every single thing his father had treasured, I had sacrificed to pay for his education. But I kept the receipts. Every single one. The change didn't happen overnight. It started small, like a hairline crack in a foundation that you don't notice until the whole house starts to lean. Freshman year, Jordan called me every Sunday night at 9 p.m. sharp. He'd tell me about his classes, his roommate from Connecticut who'd never seen a city bus, the dining hall food that was actually pretty good, Mama. He still said Mama then, not the clipped mom that would come later. You should see this place during homecoming weekend, he said one October evening, his voice full of wonder. They have this whole tent city on the quad, and the alumni drive up in cars that cost more than our apartment rent. Sounds fancy. I laughed, stirring a pot of beans that would be my dinner for the next 3 days. You fitting in okay with all those rich kids? Yeah, I think so. There's this program for first-generation college students. We meet every week and talk about stuff like how to order at restaurants with fancy names on the menu. I smiled, even though something about that sentence made my chest tight. My baby learning to navigate a world I'd never even imagined. By sophomore year, the Sunday calls became every other week, then monthly. When I asked about visiting for Parents' Weekend, he got quiet. Actually, Mama, I'm going to be really busy that weekend. Big project due. Maybe next time. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Junior year brought Emma. The first time he mentioned her, it was casual. This girl in my economics class, Emma, she's helping me with this group project. By December, it was Emma's family has a house in Martha's Vineyard, and Emma's dad went to Lockridge too, back in the 80s. I should have seen the warning signs then. I want to meet this Emma, I said during one of our increasingly brief phone conversations. Yeah, sure. Maybe over spring break. Spring break came and went. Jordan spent it skiing in Colorado with Emma's family. Sorry, Mama. It was a last-minute invitation. Emma's parents insisted. That was the first time he called me Mom instead of Mama. Like he was practicing for an audience I couldn't see. The real shift happened the summer before his senior year. I'd saved up enough for a bus ticket to visit him during his internship in the city. I was so excited. We were going to have dinner at a real restaurant, maybe catch a movie like we used to when he was little. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for Marcus's funeral and had worn to every important occasion since. I did my hair in the style Jordan used to say made me look pretty. I felt nervous but happy, like I was meeting my son for the first time in years. Which, it turned out I was. He met me at the restaurant, and I barely recognized him. The boy who used to wear secondhand jeans and sneakers with holes was gone. In his place was a young man in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His hair was cut differently, styled in a way that belonged in a magazine. Even the way he stood was different, straighter, more entitled. Hi, Mom. He kissed my cheek like we were strangers at a business meeting. The dinner was a disaster. He corrected my pronunciation of the menu items. When I asked the waitress about prices, old habit from years of counting every penny, he actually looked embarrassed. The prices are fine, Mom. Don't worry about it. But the worst moment came when I started telling him about Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall, how she'd been asking about him, how proud the whole neighborhood was. Mom, you don't need to. I mean, people don't really talk about neighborhoods here. People don't talk about neighborhoods. Like where we came from was something shameful, something to be hidden. I spent the 2-hour bus ride home crying quietly while watching the city disappear behind me. Senior year, he might as well have been a stranger. Our conversations became updates delivered in the tone you'd use with a distant relative. Classes are good. Grades are fine. Yes, I'm eating enough. When I asked about graduation plans, he was vague. Still figuring out details. You know how these things are. I didn't know how these things were. I'd never graduated from college. I'd barely finished high school before I had to start working to help my own mama pay bills. But I pretended I understood because I didn't want him to feel bad about my ignorance. The final blow came 3 weeks before graduation. I was scrolling through Facebook, one of my guilty pleasures after long shifts, when I saw the post. Jordan, tagged in photos from something called Senior Week, surrounded by beautiful young people in expensive clothes. And there was Emma, blonde and perfect, her arms around my son like she owned him. The caption read, "Can't wait for graduation weekend. So grateful for our Lockridge family." Our Lockridge family. Not his real family. His Lockridge family. I stared at those photos for an hour, looking for some trace of the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read him stories. The boy who used to say I was his best friend in the whole world. That boy was gone. In his place was someone who saw me as an embarrassment, a reminder of a life he'd outgrown. But he'd forgotten one thing in his rush to reinvent himself. I still had the receipts. Every single one. And I still had the letters, the real letters from the bursar's office, the ones that told the truth about who had really paid for his education. My son thought he could erase me from his story. He was about to learn otherwise. The morning of Jordan's graduation, I woke up before dawn. Not because I'd set an alarm, but because my body refused to sleep. I'd been lying in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling of my cramped bedroom, listening to Mrs. Rodriguez's TV through the thin walls and the constant hum of traffic from the street below. Today was the day I'd been waiting 4 years for. The day my son would walk across that stage and receive his diploma from one of the most prestigious universities in the country. The day that was supposed to be the culmination of every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred, every night I'd worked until my feet bled just to keep us afloat. Instead, I was preparing for battle. I stood in front of my tiny bathroom mirror, the one with a crack running down the left side that I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years. My reflection looked older than my 44 years. The lines around my eyes had deepened from squinting under fluorescent hospital lights. My hands, once soft and smooth, now bore the calluses and scars of 2 decades of hard labor. But today, I was going to look like the woman I used to be. The woman Marcus fell in love with. The woman who deserved to be at her son's graduation. I'd bought the dress 6 months ago, back when I still thought I'd be receiving a proper invitation. It was from the clearance rack at Macy's, navy blue with small white flowers, nothing fancy, but it fit me properly and made me feel dignified. I'd been saving it, hanging it in the back of my closet like a prayer. I did my makeup carefully, the way I used to for church on Sundays when Jordan was little. Foundation to even out the skin tone. A touch of lipstick in a shade called Confident Coral that the young salesgirl had recommended. I looked at myself one more time and saw something I hadn't seen in years. A woman worth respecting. But the most important part of my outfit wasn't visible. It was the manila folder I carried in my oversized purse, the same black handbag I'd bought for job interviews 15 years ago and had carried to every important occasion since. Inside that folder was the truth. 4 years of truth that Jordan had never seen. Tuition receipts with my name on them, not his. Bank statements showing payments of $15,000, $20,000, $18,000, each one a semester of his education paid for by the sale of his father's treasures. Email correspondence with the bursar's office where I'd specifically requested that Jordan not be notified of the payment arrangements. Letters declining the school's offer to recognize me as a major donor because I wanted to remain anonymous. And photographs. Pictures of everything I'd sold. Marcus's basketball card collection spread out on our kitchen table the night before I took them to the dealer. His grandfather's watch in its velvet box. The Mustang in Mrs. Henderson's garage, red paint gleaming under the overhead light, before I drove it to the classic car lot and signed it over to a stranger. Evidence of a love so deep I'd been willing to erase myself from my son's story, as long as he got to live his dreams. The bus ride to Lockridge took 2 hours. I sat in the back, clutching my purse and watching the landscape change from inner-city decay to suburban comfort to the manicured perfection of the university grounds. Each mile that passed felt like I was traveling to another planet, one where people like me were invisible unless we were serving coffee or cleaning bathrooms. Lockridge University sprawled before me like something from a movie set. Gothic stone buildings covered in ivy, perfectly maintained lawns that probably cost more to maintain than I made in a year, and students and families dressed in clothes that screamed money and privilege. I walked through the main gates with my head held high, even though every step felt like trespassing. Security guards nodded politely. I was dressed appropriately enough to blend in, at least from a distance. Around me, families took photos and embraced their graduating children. I watched fathers in expensive suits beam with pride, mothers in designer dresses dabbing at tears with monogrammed handkerchiefs. These people belonged here. I was an intruder, but I kept walking. The graduation ceremony was being held in Whitmore Amphitheater, an outdoor venue that could seat 5,000 people. I found the administrative building adjacent to it and asked the receptionist if I could speak with Dean Peterson. "I'm sorry, but the dean is extremely busy today with graduation preparations. Did you have an appointment?" "No, but I need just 2 minutes of her time. It's about the ceremony." "I'm afraid that's impossible. Perhaps you could email. Tell her it's about Jordan Washington. Tell her his mother is here, and she needs to see what I have in this folder." The receptionist looked at me skeptically, but something in my voice must have convinced her I wasn't going away. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Dean Peterson's office, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes who looked like she'd been born to academic privilege. "Mrs. Washington, I understand you wanted to speak with me about Jordan. I have to say, he's one of our most outstanding graduates. You must be very proud." "I am. But there's something you need to know about how he got here." I opened the manila folder and spread its contents across her mahogany desk. Bank statements, receipts, emails, photos. Dean Peterson's expression changed as she read. Her eyebrows rose, then furrowed, then rose again. "Mrs. Washington, are you telling me that you've been paying for Jordan's education this entire time?" "But his financial aid records show what I asked them to show. I paid the difference. Every semester. I sold my deceased husband's possessions to make sure my son could attend your school without worry." She picked up one of the photographs, the Mustang, and stared at it for a long moment. "And Jordan doesn't know?" "Jordan thinks he got a full scholarship. He has no idea what it actually cost. Or what I gave up." Dean Peterson leaned back in her chair. "Why are you telling me this now?" I pulled out my phone and showed her Jordan's text message. Her face went pale. "I see. I need 2 minutes on that stage today. Before my son walks across it. I need to tell the truth." She was quiet for so long, I thought she was going to refuse. Then she looked me in the eye and said something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Washington, you'll have your moment." The amphitheater was a sea of caps and gowns, proud families, and the kind of subdued excitement that comes with generations of privilege celebrating another milestone. I sat in the back row, far from the reserved seating for families of graduates, my manila folder clutched in my lap like a lifeline. Dean Peterson had kept her word. Just before the ceremony began, she'd found me and quietly explained the plan. "After the valedictorian address, I'll make a special introduction. When I call your name, walk to the stairs on the left side of the stage. You'll have 3 minutes. 3 minutes to undo 4 years of lies. 3 minutes to reclaim my place in my son's story." The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from a place like Lockridge. Distinguished faculty in elaborate robes, a processional that looked like something from a medieval coronation, speeches about legacy and tradition that made my stomach turn. These people talked about legacy like it was something you inherited, not something you sacrificed everything to create. Then came the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. "Ladies and gentlemen, our valedictorian, Jordan Marcus Washington." My heart swelled despite everything. There he was, my baby, walking across that stage with confidence that radiated from every step. 22 years old, summa cum laude, headed to Harvard Law School in the fall. Everything Marcus and I had dreamed he could become. The applause was thunderous. I found myself clapping too, tears streaming down my face, forgetting for a moment that I was supposed to be angry. Jordan approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. His voice was strong, clear, every word perfectly enunciated in a way that belonged to his new world, not the one where I'd raised him. Fellow graduates, distinguished faculty, proud families, today we celebrate not just our achievements, but the incredible support system that made them possible. I leaned forward, waiting for my name, waiting for some acknowledgement of the woman who'd made this moment possible. I want to thank the professors who challenged us, the mentors who guided us, and the generous donors whose vision and commitment to education created opportunities for students like me. Generous donors. My heart sank. I especially want to acknowledge the Whitmore Foundation, whose scholarship program allowed me to attend this institution without the burden of financial worry. I gripped the arms of my chair. The Whitmore Foundation? There was no Whitmore Foundation scholarship. There was only me, working triple shifts and selling my husband's memory piece by piece. To the alumni network that embraced us, to the legacy families who welcomed us into this community, and to everyone who believed in the power of education to transform lives, thank you. Legacy families. Alumni networks. Everyone except the woman who'd actually paid for his education. As we move forward into the world, let us remember that true success is not just what we achieve, but how we lift others as we climb. Let us be worthy of the investment that has been made in us. He never said my name, not once. As Jordan concluded his speech to another round of applause, I felt something shift inside me. The last vestige of guilt about what I was about to do disappeared completely. Dean Peterson approached the podium as Jordan returned to his seat. I could see him in the front row, Emma beside him in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Before we continue with our ceremony, Dean Peterson began, I want to take a moment to recognize someone whose story embodies the very best of what education can achieve and the sacrifices that make dreams possible. The crowd settled, curious about this deviation from the program. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Diane Washington, whose quiet generosity and unwavering dedication made today possible for her son, our valedictorian. I stood up, my legs somehow steady despite the tremor in my hands. The walk to the stage felt eternal. 5,000 pairs of eyes watched me navigate the stairs, this woman in a clearance rack dress who clearly didn't belong in their world. But when I reached that podium and looked out at the sea of faces, I found my voice. My name is Diane Washington, and I'm Jordan's mother. 4 years ago, when my son received his acceptance letter to this university, we celebrated what he thought was a full scholarship. I paused, letting that sink in. But the truth is, there was no full scholarship. There was a partial scholarship, and there was me, working 3 jobs, selling everything my late husband treasured, to cover the rest. I reached into my folder and pulled out Marcus's watch, the one I'd bought back from the pawn shop just for this moment. This watch belonged to my husband, Jordan's father. It was his grandfather's and his grandfather's before that. I sold it to pay for Jordan's sophomore year. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could see Jordan's face, white with shock. I sold his father's vintage car, his basketball card collection, everything he'd planned to pass down to his son. Because that's what mothers do. We give quietly, we sacrifice without keeping score, and we love without conditions. My voice grew stronger with each word. For 4 years, I let my son believe he earned this through scholarships and grants. I let him think generous donors and legacy families made his dreams possible. But today, when he told me I wasn't invited to watch him graduate, I decided it was time for the truth. The silence was deafening. Some of us give everything without expecting recognition. But that doesn't mean we should be forgotten. That doesn't mean we should be ashamed of who we are or where we come from. I looked directly at Jordan, my heart breaking and mending at the same time. I am proud of my son's achievements, but I am no longer willing to be invisible in his story. I stepped back from the podium to absolute silence, then slowly building applause that grew until it filled the amphitheater. I didn't stay to hear it reach its peak. I walked off that stage with my head high, leaving my son to face the truth I'd carried alone for 4 years. I walked off that stage and kept walking, past the shocked faces, past the whispers that had already begun, past the security guards who looked uncertain whether they should stop me. My heels clicked against the stone pathway with a rhythm that sounded like freedom. The campus that had felt so foreign when I arrived now seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating. I'd spoken my truth in front of 5,000 people, and the world hadn't ended. If anything, it felt like it was finally beginning. I found myself on a quiet street lined with maple trees, their late spring leaves casting dappled shadows on the sidewalk. The sounds of the graduation ceremony faded behind me, the distant hum of continuing speeches, the occasional burst of applause. I sat down on a bench that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and let myself breathe for the first time in hours. My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I pulled out my phone and stared at it, wondering if I should call Mrs. Rodriguez to tell her what I'd done, or maybe text my supervisor at the hospital to let her know I might not be in the right headspace for my shift tomorrow. Instead, I just sat there, watching well-dressed families walk past me toward the reception tents, their conversations a mixture of excitement and confusion about what they'd just witnessed. That was something else. I heard one woman say to her husband, "Did you know her son was the valedictorian?" "Incredible," he replied. "You never know what people sacrifice, do you?" I closed my eyes and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly. My heart was still raw from everything that had led to this moment, but a deep, quiet satisfaction that I'd finally stopped carrying other people's shame. "Mama?" The voice was soft, broken, and so familiar it made my chest ache. I opened my eyes to see Jordan standing a few feet away, still in his cap and gown, his face streaked with tears. He looked exactly like he had at 6 years old, the night his father died, when he'd crawled into my bed and asked if it was his fault that Daddy wasn't coming home. "Mama, why didn't you ever tell me?" I studied his face, looking for traces of the boy who used to hold my hand when we walked to the corner store, who used to tell me I was prettier than all the ladies on TV. He was there, underneath the polish and the expensive education, waiting to come home. "Because you were supposed to be proud of where you came from, baby, not ashamed." He crumpled onto the bench beside me, his graduation cap falling to the ground. "I am ashamed. I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I'm ashamed that I let them make me think you weren't enough." "Who's them, Jordan?" "Emma's family. The guys in my fraternity. Everyone who acted like success meant forgetting where you started." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, a gesture so familiar it transported me back to 1,000 scraped knees and hurt feelings. "They made me feel like I had to choose between fitting in there and loving you. And what did you choose?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "I chose wrong. God, Mama, I chose so wrong." I reached over and took his face in my hands, the same way I used to when he was little and needed comforting. "Look at me, baby." His eyes met mine, red with tears and shame. "You didn't choose wrong because you were bad. You chose wrong because you were scared. Scared that if people knew the truth about us, they'd think less of you. But Jordan, anyone who would think less of you for having a mother who loved you enough to give up everything, those aren't your people. I know that now. I know that, and I'm so sorry." We sat there for the next 3 hours, right on that bench, talking like we hadn't talked in years. He told me about the pressure he'd felt to fit in, the way Emma's parents had made subtle comments about his background, the gradual erosion of his confidence in who he was versus who he thought he needed to become. I told him about the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I was doing the right thing by keeping the truth from him, about the pride and heartbreak of watching him succeed in a world that had no room for me. As the sun began to set, painting the campus in golden light, I saw my son clearly for the first time in years. Not the polished Lockridge graduate, not the boy trying to erase his past, but the young man I'd raised to be kind and grateful and strong. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go live your life. You go to Harvard. You become the lawyer you've dreamed of being. But you do it as Jordan Washington, son of Diane and Marcus Washington, not as someone pretending to be something he's not. He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. And Emma? That's your choice to make. But choose someone who sees your worth, not someone who asks you to hide it. We walked back to the reception together, my arm linked through his, both of us knowing that something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't proud because I'd given that speech. I was proud because I'd finally chosen to stop hiding my worth, even if it meant standing on a stage in front of strangers to do it. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts.